Why is faith a good thing?
If you're going to say that Jesus was born of a virgin, that Jesus walked on water, that is palpably anti-scientific.
Can I ask you a couple questions real quick? Can I ask you one question? ¿Te puedo hacer una pregunta? If you were standing in front of God, what would you ask him? What would you ask him? I don't know.
Let me in.
Preguntaría que por qué hay tanta maldad en mí.
Who am I? Who are you? You would ask him, can I go to heaven? You don't feel like you're going to heaven right now?
Why he took my grandfather?
Why he took your grandfather?
So last week, we talked about if God exists, then why is there evil in the world? And so what we're trying to do with this series is take a look at a lot of like really critical questions that people ask of our belief in God and of our faith, because I believe that it's important for us to be able to give a defense or give an account for the hope that is within us. That's biblical as well. The Bible says, always be prepared to give an account for the hope that is within you. So the point of the series is to take a look at some of these questions and not just dismiss them, because I think a lot of times as Christians, we're just so quick to like brush aside any questions that people have about our faith without ever stopping and examining them and saying, how do we feel about this? Is there any merit to this? And examining it and seeing how we can respond to this rationally. So today I want to look at a word that I think is very, very important in our culture today, and this word is tolerance. And to outline this, I want to tell you guys about a little bit of a discussion that I had with a friend of mine on Facebook. I was on Facebook and I was having a conversation. I saw a post rather from a friend of mine. Now, she used to go to this church many years ago, but since she's not coming any longer, and she's kind of moved away from attending church and from pursuing a deeper relationship with God, and she's kind of moving in a different direction with her life. And she made a very assertive and a very angry post on the subject of abortion. Now, not without getting into the topic of abortion. I recognized that she was very upset and very passionate about her beliefs, and they're different from my beliefs. So what I want to do is I wanted to open up a dialogue with her, and I wanted to have a conversation so that I could understand where she was coming from, because we have two options when we see somebody make a very, very angry, very generalized statement on a subject that we don't agree with. We can either take offense and attack, or we can try and understand why they said it that way and where they're coming from. So I think a lot of times when we see somebody that says something in a very heated, very passionate way that we don't agree with, our impulse is to fight against them. Have you guys ever been in a situation like that? Somebody says something you don't agree with, that's how fights happen, That's, maybe some of you guys, on the way to church this morning, you had one of those situations. Somebody said something and you didn't really like it too much, so you had to respond. And so I was looking at it, I'm like, I don't want it to be a fight. I don't want it to be a situation where it's me against her. I genuinely want to understand where she's coming from, because she seems very upset and very passionate about her viewpoint. So I want to know what has led her to feeling this way. So I started asking her questions about her viewpoint. And the interesting thing for me is this is not a stranger. This is somebody that I know, that I have a relationship with. Now, granted, we don't really have proximity, and I don't see her very often now, but this is somebody that I've known for a very long time. And so I simply started asking her questions about her viewpoint. And I was asking her, how did you come to that view? Why do you feel so passionately about it? And she started becoming very, very, very angry with me for asking her questions about why she felt the way that she did. And she started eventually resorting to name-calling with me and saying that I was being belligerent and things like this, and it was really confusing to me, because at this point I had made no assertions whatsoever. I was just asking her questions about what she believed. So I'm like, how are you feeling that I'm being ignorant, or I'm being arrogant, or that I'm being belligerent, when I'm simply asking you what you believe? I have not said anything about my opinions. I have not said I don't agree with you. I haven't said anything yet. I'm just asking you because I want to know where you're coming from. But the interesting thing was it was like she didn't want to talk about her viewpoints on the situation. She just wanted to put a statement out there and then just have everybody accept her statement for what it was without anybody questioning it. Have you guys ever seen something like that? So I'm asking these questions, and so she starts going on, and eventually I get to this question, And I asked her a question because she's talking about how it's not a matter of abortion, it's not a matter of any of that, it all comes down to a woman's right to choose. And I said, okay, if that's really the way that you feel about the situation, then a question that I have for you is, at what point does it stop being like tissue in a woman's body and it becomes a living life? At what point is that line crossed? Is it the moment of birth? Is it the moment of conception? Is it at 3 months? Is it the moment the heartbeat comes? At what point do you feel, not scientifically, but at what point do you feel that it becomes a human life? And I feel like this is a very valid question to ask, and I don't feel like that's belligerent, and I don't feel like I'm crossing any lines by asking this question. I'm curious as to at what point she feels that it becomes a human life. And the minute I asked her this question, she lost her mind. And she started freaking out, and she was like, you know what you're just a sexist, and you hate women, and you don't want women to be able to choose what they do, and you just want to keep us in the past and not allow us to progress and move forward. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Have you met my wife? Like, she's pretty happy, and I think she would disagree with you. But she got furious and started calling me arrogant and all these sorts of things, and then she used the word, you're intolerant. She said, you're intolerant of other people who don't share your viewpoints, and I'm sick of hearing about it, which I felt was a self-contradictory statement. Do you guys notice that? You're intolerant of other people's viewpoints, and I'm sick of hearing about it. I was like, well, you're intolerant of my viewpoints, but to be perfectly honest, I haven't even given you my viewpoints, so you're intolerant of what you believe my views to be, which I haven't even expressed. I'm confused. So it was a very, very interesting situation, but it outlined a very important topic, and I believe that intolerance and the word tolerance is something that's very critical to our culture right now. They did a poll recently, and they asked people, what's your number one objection to Christianity? Well, actually it said religion, but Christianity was factored in there. And people answered that their number one objection to religion, specifically Christianity, was that they felt that it was intolerant. So this is something that we have to look at as Christians. Are we intolerant? Are we supposed to be intolerant? As Christians, should we tolerate everything? How are we supposed to respond to this? If we talk to somebody, we try to share the gospel with them, and they say that we're being intolerant to their viewpoints, how do we respond? And I don't know if this is a question you guys have ever had to ask yourself, but I do believe that if you are in a habit of sharing your faith with other people, people that don't have a relationship with God, you will come across this question or this topic in some way, shape, or form. If you've never encountered it in your life, you probably want to question whether or not you've been very proactive with sharing your faith with other people. Because the minute you share your faith with somebody that does not share your faith, which is what we as Christians are commanded to do, you run the risk of somebody saying that you are intolerant and you're trying to force your beliefs upon me. And it comes in many different questions. Oh, you're cramming the Bible down my throat. Don't force your beliefs on me. That might work for you, but not for me. I don't want to hear about it. That's you. I'll do me. And I'm sure you guys have heard many different variations of it. But this is something that is prevalent for us in our society today because there is a push for people of differing views to accept the views of others, but not only that, to approve of them. Okay? And there's a push for this in our culture nowadays that not only do we accept someone else's viewpoints as their viewpoints and are more accepting of it, but that we also start to approve of them. And that's really where the language starts to change on how we handle the situation. Because there's a difference between accepting somebody and the lifestyle that they live and approving of somebody and the lifestyle that they live. Are you guys with me on that? But this is the push that is being made for us today. And as the society is pushing for this, I believe, from my perspective and from what I've been observing, that this is a push that is happening pervasively across our culture, but while it's happening, the push for tolerance has become very, very, very one-sided. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but it's suddenly become very unpopular to talk to anybody outside of Christianity about their beliefs, but it's very, very popular to criticize those within the Christian community for their beliefs. Have you guys noticed this at all? If you guys watch media or anything like that, the news, talk shows, you'll notice Christians get criticized very frequently. I was actually watching a comedy movie with some friends of mine last night. It was a British comedy, and it was about this radio show host, and he was on the radio, and his co-host made a joke about Muslims, and he instantly shut down the show and went to a commercial, and he's like, never, ever, ever joke about Muslims. Only Christians. And sometimes Jews, but never Muslims, and jumped on his case about it. And it was played up for laughs, but there is some merit to that. And if you guys watch the news media, you'll see people criticizing Christianity and attacking it. And I believe that it's become something very, very, very one-sided. Everyone wants Christians to accept opposing views and opposing beliefs, but nobody wants to accept, the beliefs or the teachings of the gospel. And as a brief example of that, I have some video clips I want to show you guys. I didn't really have a lot of time to put this video together, and I'm sure there's many, many, many instances of this that I'm sure you guys have seen or witnessed that you can think of. But this is just a few examples of what this looks like in our culture. So we're going to throw this up on the screen whenever you guys are ready.
The Supreme Court has ruled against the Christian owners of a B&B who only allow couples to share a double bed if they are married. Judges said the policy discriminated against gay couples, even though it was applied to unmarried heterosexuals as well as homosexuals.
No, on the face of it, it looks like that because, of course, we've always refused a double-bedded accommodation to unmarried heterosexual couples.
Why do you do that, though? Why are you never?
It's Bible-based. It's entirely Bible-based.
But as a Christian, surely the God that you worship is a loving God, is a tolerant God. And if people are in a civil partnership, they're obviously in love. So what's wrong with them sharing a bed?
I think it's a myth to believe that entirely. He is a loving God, that's true. He's a forgiving God, but there is...
And a tolerant one.
He is a long-suffering God. He's not entirely tolerant because the Bible is full of cases when he does finally bring judgment about. And we felt that we wanted to, as far as possible, live according to his instructions. And the Bible's very clear about marriage.
2013. It's 2013.
God hasn't changed. Jesus says he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. He hasn't changed. The Bible hasn't changed. And we're wrong. We're living in a dream if we think that he's changed his laws to suit us, because that's not the case at all.
Too many people in the world of religion take it too seriously. Is that part of the problem?
I think we should take Jesus seriously. We should take the Bible seriously. Probably shouldn't take ourselves nearly as seriously, and that's how I approach it.
Do you think you're a tolerant kind of guy?
I love people very much, and it's
that's not the same thing.
It's how do you disagree sometimes with people that you love? That's a very difficult issue for everybody, but for a pastor in particular.
But do you preach tolerance?
I preach that we should love our neighbor, that we should accept diversity.
Tolerance in particular.
You keep hammering it. What do you mean by tolerance?
Tolerating people who may have a lifestyle or a belief that you don't agree with.
Yeah, we have to. And that's when Jesus says, love your neighbor. He knows you're not going to agree with all your neighbors, but he wants you to love them, to seek good for them, to care for them.
The Bible is what it is. It's an extraordinary book which has governed people's moral and personal behaviors now for thousands of years. However, like everything in life, shouldn't it be dragged kicking and screaming into each modern era and be adapted like the American Constitution? Yeah. Because my view about this is not that I don't respect Christians or Catholics or whoever who absolutely swear by every word in here. It's just that I just don't believe anyone who's genuinely Christian should be spouting bigoted opinions about sections of the community for their sexuality.
Well, I think when it comes to the Bible, you've got three options. Take it, I believe what it says. Leave it, I don't believe what it says, or change it.
Or adapt the wording.
Which would be the changing
for a modern era.
Would be the changing of it. That's exactly what, for example, Thomas Jefferson did. He literally sat down in the White House with scissors and cut the parts out that he didn't feel should be in there.
But the issue here is the issue of respect. While I may disagree with you on your views on sexuality, it does not give me a right to demean you, to demoralize you, to defame you, to turn you into a demon. See, tolerance, Pierce, used to mean we treat each other with mutual respect even if we have major disagreements. Today, tolerance has been changed to mean all ideas are equally valid.
My issue is that there are many things in the Bible which simply today wouldn't fly.
I fear the disapproval of God more than I fear your disapproval or the disapproval of society.
So right there we saw a couple of examples of lights not being on, and there we go. We saw a couple of examples of one-sided intolerance, I believe, and to be perfectly honest, I don't pull these out as isolated incidences. I pull them out as just examples of the norm. And this is the way that society has gone to. So as we looked at those videos, we saw 3 different scenarios. The first one was a story about this bed and breakfast owner in the United Kingdom. And they've had this bed and breakfast that they run out of their home for the past 20 years. And since they started it, they're a Christian couple. They have very strong Christian convictions. And they feel that they have issue with giving single-bedded accommodation to unmarried couples. Now, it doesn't matter what the orientation or what the situation, they don't want to rent out a single-bedded room to unmarried couple because they believe that that goes against their conviction. And that's been a policy in place at their hotel since they founded it 20 years ago. But a homosexual couple came in trying to book a room, and they said, "I'm sorry, we can't book you in a single-bedded accommodation, but we can give you a double-bedded one." They felt that that was discriminatory, so they sued them, took it to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. They lost the suit. This couple was forced to pay damages and all this sort of thing. They nearly lost their business. In fact, they practically did, but some Christians in the area and some Christian organizations banded together and helped pay their legal costs and some of the damages and things of that nature so that they could keep their business open and afloat. And they've had a lot of support from the Christian community, but at the same time, they've also received, this happened a year ago, in the past year, they received many death threats. They've had some windows broken out, vandalism. Some people have even gone so far as to nail dead rabbits to their fences in an effort to try and punish them for their intolerance without stopping to examine the fact that they are themselves being very intolerant of these people's viewpoints. You guys seeing how it becomes very one-sided? People feel like this couple is being intolerant. We need to teach them a lesson and punish them for their viewpoints. And so then we look at these 2 pastors that were on the Piers Morgan show, and he was asking them the question of tolerance, and I think the last pastor responded beautifully where he said, I fear the disapproval of God more than I fear the disapproval of you, which is what we as Christians, the mentality that we need to have, because let's be perfectly honest, what God thinks about us is far more important and far more long-lasting than the opinions of a person, are they not? But a lot of times we're so interested in what people think about us, we're willing to compromise what God thinks about us. But that's another issue for another day. But one of the pastors said something that was very interesting to me. The man kept on saying, "Are you tolerant? Are you tolerant?" And he kept on saying, "I'm loving, I'm this, I'm that." And he's like, "Are you tolerant?" He kept on asking him this question. The pastor asked him another question in return. He said, "What do you mean by tolerant?" What do you mean by tolerant? I think that that's a very important question to ask, because a lot of times when you hear this word thrown out, they don't mean it in the way that you think that they mean it, or the classical definition of the word. They don't mean it that way. In fact, I believe that they've absolutely redefined the definition of the word tolerance. And I believe that they've moved away from a classical definition and they've moved to a postmodern definition of tolerance where all views are equally valid and should be equally accepted. And I believe that that's the core of what they're getting at. They're not getting at the classical definition of the word tolerance. They're getting at a postmodern definition of it. And they're saying that all views are equal, they're equally valid, they should be equally accepted, everybody's right. That can't be true, can it? That can't be true. Everybody cannot be right. They can't. And for them to say that all viewpoints are valid and should be equally accepted falls apart the minute that you have contradicting viewpoints. So, for example, me and this young girl that we were talking about abortion, she believes it's okay. My viewpoint on it is that it is not okay. So she thinks it's good. I think that it's wrong. So here's where the contradiction and the fallacy comes into play. If I believe that her viewpoint is wrong, then either her viewpoint's wrong or my viewpoint is wrong, correct? But regardless, one of our viewpoints is wrong. They cannot both be right, especially because one of our viewpoints says that the other one is incorrect. Okay? So now that argument falls to pieces because every viewpoint can't be true if some viewpoints say that other viewpoints are incorrect. It starts to fall apart because they've redefined the definition of the word. The actual definition of the word tolerance is the ability or willingness to tolerate, allow, or put up with something, in particular, the existence of opinions or behavior that one does not necessarily agree with. I'm here to tell you, you can only tolerate what you don't agree with. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to agree with a viewpoint that you don't agree with, and they're calling that tolerance, but you can only tolerate what you don't agree with. Because the minute that you agree with something, now you don't tolerate it anymore, you agree with it. You guys understand how that works? You're not tolerating something any longer because you actually like that. You guys ever have, like, when you were a kid, maybe you had, like, a food that you didn't like vegetables, like, let's say, like, asparagus. You're like, man, I tolerate it. My mom makes me eat it, and I tolerate it. And you grow up, and, like, maybe your tastes change, and maybe your wife makes it better than your mom used to or something. You're like, I like it now. You don't tolerate it any longer because your opinions and your viewpoints have changed. Now you approve of it. So when they use the word tolerance, they're using the wrong word. Basically what they're saying is stop feeling the way that you feel and start feeling the way that we feel. That's really what they're getting at, which in itself is intolerant, is it not? And so what is being pushed for right now is the belief that all truth is relative. And what they're basically getting at is that what's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me. That's pretty much what people are getting at in the world nowadays, is that's your truth, this is my truth, you believe your truth, I believe my truth. But like I said earlier, that falls apart the minute that any of those belief systems start making exclusive claims. Now, I'm not getting too deep for you guys, am I? Like, we're all on the same page, we good? Because if my truth says your truth is a lie, is it still true? Does that make sense? So the minute that they say that, what's true for you is true for you, what's true for me is true for me, that falls apart the minute that I say, well, my belief is that Jesus is the only way to salvation. My belief is that you can't live this way. My belief is that you cannot do this. So therefore, one of us has to be in the wrong. And so there's a push for all truth being relative, but there's also a push for religious pluralism. And what that means is that all religions are a pathway to God. Everybody is on their path to a higher knowledge or higher power. Have you guys heard that one before? And there's a really massive push for this in our culture today, that all beliefs have valid viewpoints. And if you ever try and tell somebody that Jesus is the only way, it meets with some serious problems, because everything is a road to God in our culture today. And there's a massive push for this, but again, this is something that cannot be true. And in the name of tolerance, they want to try and force it to be true. They want to say, well, you need to tolerate other religions, and you need to be tolerant of their viewpoint, and you need to be tolerant of the fact that maybe there's just multiple ways that go to God. But that starts falling apart the minute that you say, well, Jesus claimed to be God. Okay? Now, the Jewish people don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God, do they? But Jesus claimed to be God, and we as Christians believe that he was the Son of God. They believe that he wasn't. They're still waiting for the Son of God to come. So when Jesus says he's the Son of God, either he was wrong and they're right, or he was right and we're right. Does that make sense? And then you start looking at the other religions, and they have different viewpoints on what happens after you die. Some people believe you go to heaven and hell. Some people believe in reincarnation. Some people believe you get your own planet. Really, that's a thing. So they cannot all be right. And I think the interesting thing to look at this morning is that many of these people, I don't believe, have ever examined the contradictions in their own belief system. Because the minute that you start examining it is the minute that the argument starts to fall apart. And I believe that that's why a lot of people retreat from having to defend their positions. That's why this girl that I was talking to, the minute I asked her to define for me at what point it becomes a human life, she got angry and upset because she didn't want to have to answer that question. Because the minute that she gives me an answer, now she's given me a finite place where it's crossed over from an abortion to a murder. Are you seeing that? If it becomes a human life, it's not about choice anymore. Now it's about the right to live. So she doesn't want to define that for me. She wants to avoid it because she knows that the minute that she defines it, now it becomes very, very indefensible as an argument, doesn't it? When it's no longer down here and now it's up here, it becomes very, very difficult to defend it. And I believe that many people have never really examined the contradictions in what they believe. I was watching a documentary on abortion a year or so ago, and they were interviewing a gentleman who works for the government who's one of the major lobbyists for abortion rights in this country, and they asked him a very interesting question. They said, "You're a father, aren't you?" And he said, "Yes." They said, "When your wife was pregnant and she was laying in bed next to you and you would watch the baby kick in her stomach, was that baby alive to you or was it unliving tissue?" And they asked him this question. And he said, "Well, for me, from the moment of conception, that was my child. And as I would watch it kick and as I would watch it move and as I would listen to it and I would go to ultrasounds and see it and I would hear the heartbeat, that was my living, breathing child. And that's my viewpoint on it. But I would never force my viewpoint on someone else." So what this man's saying is, I believe it's a human being. But if somebody else believes it's not a human being, then I need to be tolerant of their viewpoint. Do you see how dangerous that kind of a mentality can be? Because if that's your rationale, then if you don't call shooting somebody in the face murder, you call it patty cake, then that's your viewpoint. You know what I mean? And I can't tell you any otherwise because that's your viewpoint on it. For me, it's murder. For me, I wouldn't do it. For me, it's wrong. But for you, it's patty cake. Go for it. And I don't believe that people have ever examined these contradictions, because the minute you really start looking at them, the minute you really start examining why you believe what you believe, is the minute that a lot of these presuppositions start to fall apart. I was talking with a young kid, this is a couple weeks ago, and this is a true story, and I'm talking with this kid, and he's telling me that he is a religious pluralist, and he's telling me he believes in all gods. And I was like, okay, so I'm expecting him to say, like, I believe in Allah, and I believe in God, and I believe in, a couple of those other things. But then he starts, like really throwing a curveball at me, and he's like, oh, I pray to Athena. I'm like, the Greek goddess? Like, I thought that's called mythology for a reason, Like, nobody believes in that anymore. She left the block, like, centuries ago. She's not even on the radar. You're praying to her? And then he starts saying that he prayed to Thor. I'm like, bro, really? He's a superhero now. He got downgraded, He's not even a god anymore. They, like, pushed him down to an Avenger, Like, you're praying to that guy? And then he starts going on all these other gods and stuff like that. And I was like, well, why do you pray to all these gods? He's like, well, because I believe that all of these gods are just expressions and pathways to a higher knowledge. And I was like, okay, well, do you believe that Jesus was a god? And he was like, oh, yes, absolutely. He's one of many gods, and he's one of many ways to God. And I said, okay, well, what about the time when Jesus said that there is no way to the Father but through me? I am the way, the truth, the life. I was like, what about that? He's like, oh, well, I think he was just wrong on that statement. I said, well, that's interesting. You believe that Jesus is God, correct? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, well, how can God be wrong? And he was thinking, and he's like looking at me. He's like, okay, now you're confusing me. I was like, I'm not confusing you. I'm just asking you about what you yourself say you believe. You're telling me that Jesus is God, but he can get things wrong, but that still makes him God, and he's just one of many gods, but he's also lying about the fact that he's the only God. Why would a God lie? And so I'm asking these questions, and he's starting to get very, very upset. And he's like, okay, well, just you're confusing me, and I need you to stop. Because I don't think he's ever stopped and examined his viewpoints. I think that he just has these opinions or these things that he's heard. And a lot of times what's happened is people hear popular slogans, or they hear something that they like, and they grab onto it and they hold onto it, never fully examining and asking themselves, why do I actually believe this junk? And so the minute that you start asking them questions, they have two options. They can either examine why they believe what they believe and expose themselves to positive dialogue, or they can become angry and call you intolerant and hide behind the fact that they don't really know why they believe what they believe, so they're just going to call you names. I believe that intolerance changes the subject matter and it takes the focus off the issue, and that's one of the main reasons why it's used so much today. When I was having a conversation with this girl, I asked her, the conversation that we're having is about whether, what her viewpoint on abortion is. It's not even whether it's right or wrong. I just want to get to where she feels about it. That's the conversation at hand. But she starts realizing, as I'm asking her these questions, that she's having less and less solid ground to stand upon. So she lashes out and she attacks and she calls me intolerant as a smokescreen to distract from the real issue. Because if she can get the conversation over to me being insensitive and me being intolerant, then I'm the bad guy. And now I have to fight to defend myself instead of us focusing on the real issue, which is really what we should be having a dialogue about, not whether or not I'm a bad guy. And so I'm like, okay, let's say for the sake of the argument, I'm a jerk. Let's say I'm a terrible person and I hate women and I want them to be in chains and never make decisions for themselves. Now that I've said that and we've got that out of the way, can we talk about the issue that I'm trying to discuss? Let's just say for the sake of the argument, like, I'm just the worst person ever. I admit it. You win. Can we talk about the issue at hand? But they don't want to do that. People don't want to have those conversations because when they do, they know that they have to be prepared to defend why they believe what they believe. And I believe that most people do not know why they believe what they believe. And the reality is that we are living in a culture where we are training people to become upset if somebody disagrees with them. And it's crippling. It's crippling. We train people to become upset if somebody simply disagrees with them, and it's crippling. And so we say things like, well, how would you like if somebody said that you were wrong? I'd be fine with it. I'm an adult, How old do you have to be before that stops being a problem for you? At what point in your maturity level can you handle the concept that somebody else doesn't agree with you? Instead of exposing people to different viewpoints, instead of talking about these so that we can learn how to have a dialogue, We just say, you can't say that I'm wrong. So never say the words that I'm wrong. Never go into that territory. How would you like it if somebody says you're wrong? And to be perfectly honest, we need to be completely fine with that. We need to be completely fine with that. We need to be not so easily offended. If you're so easily offended that you can't listen to somebody tell you you're wrong, you're never going to get anywhere in life, and you're never going to win friends and influence people, and you're never going to change the world for Jesus because you're never going to be exposed to somebody that has a different viewpoint from you. How do you impact the world if you just stay in a bubble where everybody agrees with you? That's why, to be perfectly honest, church, if you guys, man, if you guys are afraid of going out into the world and telling people about God because they might disagree with you, dude, you are in the wrong friggin' religion. You know what I mean? Get out there and tell people about God. Well, what if they disagree with me? So what? You're a grown-up. Handle it. Take some Kleenex with you, but go out there, and they're going to disagree with you. But that's okay. It's okay. I promise. You'll get over it. But we're creating a culture where, man, people cannot disagree with it. Everybody has to be on our viewpoint. And we as Christians have to understand that not everybody's going to like what we think. Not everyone's going to like what the Bible says, and that's okay. But we're obligated as Christians, if this really is the truth, if you truly believe it's the truth, we're obligated to take it to people, aren't we? See, the word tolerance implies that a view is wrong and must be tolerated. You can only tolerate something that you don't agree with. The very word intolerance, the fact that they use that is amazing to me because the implication there is that something is inherently wrong with the thing that you're disagreeing with. So to use the word tolerance, it implies that I'm doing something that I probably shouldn't, so you need to tolerate it. Because if you're doing something you genuinely believe is right, you wouldn't use the word tolerate it, would you? Because we only tolerate things that we don't agree with. For example, football, okay? I tolerate football because it's stupid. You know, if football was good, I would like football. You know, if football was awesome, I wouldn't have any reason to tolerate it. Do you understand what I'm saying? We only tolerate the things that we don't like. And so when I go to a football fan and I'm like, hey, you know, I don't really care for football, they never say, well, you need to tolerate football. You need to tolerate it because to them football is awesome. They're like, what? You don't like football? Football's amazing. So the fact that people use the word tolerance is interesting to me because the implication with tolerance is that something is wrong, that there's a viewpoint that is wrong there. Even the word tolerance sounds negative, doesn't it? Doesn't it? The word tolerance sounds negative. Maybe stop thinking about Jati, okay? I love Jati. No, listen, I love Jati. She's my sister in Christ. She's a beautiful young lady. She's got an amazing heart and an amazing spirit, and I love and care deeply for Jati. Manny, I tolerate him. Which one sounds better? You know? The word tolerance doesn't sound very good, does it? I mean, can you imagine in your marriage vows to tolerate? But the word tolerance doesn't even sound very, very caring, does it? I mean, stop and think about it. Like, do you love your kids or do you tolerate them? Now, occasionally, some of you guys, I don't want to ask that today. Maybe ask you at a later time. But even the word tolerance sounds negative. Because I believe the word tolerance is weak. I believe that the word tolerance there is negative connotations to that word. I believe that the word tolerance is a lower form of what we as Christians are called to do. And what we as Christians are called to do is not necessarily tolerate, but to love, because I believe love is greater. Amen. Are you guys with me this morning? Amen. So when people say that Christians are intolerant, I would say, you know what? As a Christian, I want to do more than tolerate, man. I want to love you. I want to love you. I don't tolerate my kids when they misbehave. Man, I love them when they misbehave. Are you guys with me? I don't tolerate my brother or my sister when we disagree or when we get into an argument. Man, I love them even when we're in an argument. See, tolerance tells us to put up with somebody, but love tells us to reach out to somebody. Amen. Tolerance focuses on the difference, but love focuses on the people. We tolerate people because of our differences, but man, we love them in spite of our differences, don't we? And as Christians, I'm here to tell you, man, we are not called to simply tolerate the world. Man, we are called to love the world. Amen. We are called to love the world, even people that feel differently from you, even people that believe differently from you, even people who have a lifestyle that is contrary to what we approve of or what we believe. And I want you to stop and think about how much we're called to how much we're called to love over tolerance. Stop and think about like the fact of if you changed all the verses in the Bible that talked about love to the word tolerance. The world will know that you're my disciples by the way that you tolerate one another. For God so tolerated the world. Christ demonstrated his tolerance in this. God is tolerance. The greatest of these commandments is that you tolerate the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and tolerate your neighbor as yourself. Man, how much does that devalue the beauty of a relationship and a transcendent love empowered by the Holy Spirit? Amen. Doesn't it? How much does tolerance, does that viewpoint devalue what God wants us to do and what God has called us to do as Christians? I'm here to tell you, if you settle for tolerance as a Christian, you are a sissy. You're called to love. Love is more difficult. Love is more messy. Love is harder. The Bible says that love keeps no track of wrongs. The Bible says that love covers a multitude of sins. Tolerance does not cover a multitude of sins. Tolerance is very aware of a multitude of sins, and it chooses to grit its teeth and to get through life, even acknowledging those sins, but it is aware of them. Love covers a multitude of sins, meaning it obscures it, meaning it hides it, meaning that's not an issue any longer. And you can't see the issue, you see the person. And you see a person that's just as lost as you were. You see a person that's just as far away from God as you were once. And you see a person that's just in need of a Savior as you yourself once were. And love calls us to action. Amen. Tolerance calls us to non-action, doesn't it? Tolerance causes us to draw a line and say, okay, you're over there and you're over here, and I'm not going to mess with your line, and I'm not going to step over here and make things difficult for you. But love says there is no line, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to get beside you, and I'm going to try and help you make decisions that are going to benefit you, and I'm going to try and help you to move towards a relationship with God, because guess what, man? I have a relationship with this Jesus that you don't agree with, and you might not see it now, but I'm going to live my life in such a way, and I'm going to speak to you in such a manner that you have no choice but to see this beautiful gift of salvation. But I'm here to tell you, church, man, if you don't have something that's more attractive to them than the things that they're living in, they're going to keep on calling for tolerance. Do you hear me? Amen. So, man, we have to live in a way that the world sees us, and the world says, I'm not going to tolerate the way that I'm living, and I want to pursue what they have because what they have is better than what I have. And maybe it's not intolerance anymore. And maybe us reaching out, I'm here to tell you, sometimes the most loving thing that you can do is lovingly disagree with somebody. Are you guys with me? I've lost many friends over this in my life, but I always tell people, I will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. It's like a motto for me. I will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And a lot of times people get upset because they came to me looking for what they wanted to hear. They came to me looking for tolerance. They came to me looking for me to share in their opinions or their viewpoints on something. I'm like, listen, I love you too much to agree with you. Are you guys with me? Parents, man, if you love your child, you love them too much to tolerate bad behavior, don't you? Spouses, if you love your spouse, you love them too much to tolerate them making decisions that are going to hurt them or their family. Man, if you love somebody, you love them too much to tolerate any kind of decision that's going to hurt them. And I believe that as Christians, we need to move not so much towards tolerance. I believe that that can be a good thing and a necessary thing, because I do believe that we have to have some degree of tolerance in our lives towards different viewpoints. But man, I think we need to move more and more and more every day towards love. And we need to say, I need to stop settling for tolerance. Because I think a lot of times we as Christians, we have settled for tolerance when we need to be moving in the direction of love. And we've said, I'm going to stay down here when, man, God has called us as a Christian to a higher standard. We're called to live up here. And we're called to go above and beyond. And we're called to reach people for the gospel. We're called to show people that, man, there is a beautiful, wonderful relationship with Christ that can transform their lives if they would just give it a chance. And I'm here to tell you, man, some of you guys in this room, man, we've been tolerant. We need to stop being tolerant and start being loving, because God has called us to love. Because love is the greatest thing we could ever possibly do, because God loved us so much. I'd like you to bow your head and close your eyes with me for a few minutes this morning. And the first thing I want to do this morning before we progress any longer is I want to give an opportunity if there's anybody in this room today and you don't have a relationship with God. Man, you don't have a relationship with God this morning, and at some point, something I said today maybe struck a chord with you, man. Maybe you've been living in a way where you've believed a lot of things. You've been so afraid of moving towards a relationship with God because of how difficult it might be, because maybe some people wouldn't approve. And I just want to encourage you today to make a choice. I want to encourage you today, man, that the best thing you could possibly do is to give your life over to God. And I want to ask, man, if there's anybody in here today, you don't have a relationship with Jesus and you would like to start that off this morning, and you would like to give him a chance. Is there anybody in here today you want to have a relationship with Christ? I know I didn't necessarily talk much about that, but if that's you today, I want you to raise your hand so that I can pray with you this morning. If there's anybody in here at all, and something about the message today maybe struck a chord with you, maybe you came here today looking for a change. Is anybody in the room today and you want to have a relationship with Christ? I'd like you to raise your hand. All right, I'm gonna believe that everybody in the room, man, you have a relationship with Christ. So what I want to do now is I want to ask for all the believers, if you guys can look at me for a moment. Today I talked about tolerance, and I just want to apologize, man. There's a lot of distractions going on today, and I really feel like I was distracted coming up here, and I want to apologize for that. But what I want to do is challenge you guys this morning, because the one thing that I've seen a lot, like in our church culture, is we have to examine criticisms that come against the church, don't we? Okay? So when somebody says that you know, like the word intolerance, if that's the number one objection in this country towards people of faith, then we need to examine why people are saying that. We can't just say, oh, well, they're wrong. We have to examine why they're saying that. And I do believe that a lot of times Christians have a mentality or an approach to telling people the truth that is malicious. And I do believe, and I've said this before, that I believe that the truth can be marred by malicious delivery. And I do believe that we can take the great, wonderful news of the gospel and we can put it out there in such a way that we burn people towards a relationship with Christ. And I think that has to change. So my challenge for you guys this morning is this, that we examine this and we change our delivery, that we will start talking to people in a way that is going to influence them towards God. And Jesus said that our words need to be seasoned with love, and everything that we do, that it's just covered in love, that it's saturated in love. When people see something that is absolutely delivered in a loving way, they start to recognize that you're not being intolerant and you're just being loving. And an interesting thing for me is one of the clips that I showed you this morning, you saw the couple with the bed and breakfast in England. And they were interviewed on a news station, and the news reporter was basically like yelling at them, saying, and I wish I could get the whole clip, but they've since taken it down. But the news reporter was yelling at this lady, saying that she was being intolerant, and she was basically like mistreating her on the show, saying that she was being intolerant. And so many people like wrote in and complained, saying, well, no, the news reporter was actually being mean to this lady, that they ended up taking that clip down, and there were a lot of copies of it on YouTube, but they've removed it because they realized that their reporter was being belligerent. And so my challenge to you today is to start responding like this lady responded. In the full clip, it was amazing to me, because even though this reporter was like shouting at her and mistreating her, she was responding very gracefully. She was responding very lovingly. She was not allowing herself to be provoked. She was not allowing herself to be angered. She was not allowing herself to be offended. She was saying, listen, this is just the Bible. I understand that you don't agree with me, but I love you. This is what the Bible says. This is how I have to live my life. And she was not compromising the truth, but she was not coming to the table with her fists clenched, if you know what I mean. I think that as Christians, we have to change our delivery, but we have to be more loving. We need to stop tolerating the lifestyles around us and start loving the people, even though we don't agree with their lifestyles, and start pursuing bringing a relationship with God to people. Because if we truly believe that this is the truth, if we absolutely believe that Jesus is the way, if we absolutely believe that it's the best life you could ever possibly have, then the most loving, most tolerant thing that we could do is tell people about that truth and tell people about that God.